I'm Matthew Kurbis, the subscription attorney, and this is Law Subscribed, your dedicated source for all things subscriptions and the law. After 4 years of teaching lawyers how to ditch billing time for subscriptions and practicing what I preach as a law firm owner, I started a legal tech company called Practi to make it easier for firms to trade billing time for predictable revenue. It's free to create an account, customize subscription packages, and sign up your first subscribing client at Practi.ai. Thank you to my sponsors. See links to them in the show notes. Everything discussed is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Enjoy the show. I'm very excited to have I've only had it a few times, a listener becoming guest on the pod, which I should have more of. Reach out. Rachel Saunders of Saturday Legal. Welcome to Law Subscribed.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So, we were kind of talking before we clicked record about like how you discovered the podcast, but do you remember like how you found out about the content I was putting out there?
I think it just was that in the beginning, I was feeling very much like, am I doing this right? Are there other lawyers out there that are thinking about delivering legal services in this other way? And for context, I started my firm in June or July of 2024. I feel like there's definitely a lot more out there now about different billing models. But about a year and a half ago, it felt a little bit like, where else can I look for precedent as a good lawyer? And somehow came across your podcast and you. And so just was interested to know that there are other people out there thinking the same kinds of things.
Yeah, and it really thrills me to hear that too, because it was like 2018 when I started to think like, gosh, billing by the hour, this is awful. There has to be a better way. And I like found one ABA article with a few lawyers in there, of which Kim Bennett was one of them. And just to work up the courage, to reach out took like a year. And then I thought, well, gosh, I'm having these conversations with these lawyers in this article. Wouldn't that be a nice podcast? So like if someone's like me in the future looking for resources on alternatives to billing by the hour, like they could find it. And so that was the genesis of the podcast. So really, like it only took like 3+ years until finally, I guess, it started to work. So
Yeah.
I'm glad I could be one of hopefully many resources out there for you these days.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and I definitely realized that the billable hour was not for me a long time ago, but I thought the only alternative was to go in-house, which is what I did in 2017. So I think that that's kind of like it's relevant for the firm that I started, but it's just good for lawyers in general to know that there's a third way.
Yeah. So then how long were you billing by the hour, Rachel, before you decided you had to get out?
So I was that's not why I left, but I mean definitely one of the things on the list.
Sure,
But
sure.
I practiced at Sidley for 4 years. I was in the corporate group doing mostly M&A. So billed by the hour for 4 years, and I billed a lot of hours just to both the nature of a big law, but also the specific practice area that I was in was just a very, very high billable hour expectation job, which was great. I mean, really, like I got my 10,000 hours in that amount of time, which is what you need to be an expert.
They
So
weren't all
I'm grateful.
billable and clients didn't pay every the hour, but you got them in, that's for sure, right?
Yeah, got them in. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great experience. Like I know a lot of attorneys who are formerly of Sidley Austin, amongst other big law firms, right? I mean, at a minimum, something big law does do really well is actually get lawyers trained and give them experience, right? Which law school just does not do.
No, you leave law school and you're like, okay, first you leave law school and you're like, wait, I have to study for the bar. This is completely different than anything that I learned in law school. And then you pass the bar and you go and you work and you realize that you learned how to think differently, but that's really it. You just set this amazing foundation, and then you actually need to learn how to practice law. And that's so I think that going and working at a big law firm for the first few years is the best experience that you can possibly get.
Yeah, and look, most lawyers are not going to do that. I didn't do that, but from what I've heard, and I'm curious to know if this has been your experience, they say good things, but that they're happy they're no longer in the big law grind.
Yeah. Yeah, well, so yes, I am very grateful that I was able to get that experience in at that point in my life. I now have three little kids. They're 3, 6, and 9 years old, and I can't imagine trying to make my life work and still billing by the hour. So like it just wouldn't be possible, I don't think. And but but yeah, I feel like, if that moment lines up for you at the right point in your life, it's incredible to get that experience.
Absolutely. And so then parenthood was on the horizon and you looked to get out of billing time, and in-house was that avenue to do that then.
It was a little bit more serendipitous than that.
Okay.
So I was actually not really looking to leave quite yet. I got the opportunity to go work for one of Peak Six was the firm I went to work for, and Peak Six was a Sidley client. And I got the opportunity to go in house probably about 2 years before I had planned for myself. I thought
Mhm.
that I was going to get a couple more years of negotiating experience and drafting experience, but the opportunity came when it came, and so I jumped at it. So I moved into an in-house role where, and I definitely didn't like plan for this to be the case, but I moved into an in-house role where I got to continue to learn from an amazing attorney. I was deputy general counsel, and the general counsel that I worked for, he would have been a part he had worked in the same group as I did at Sidley. He would have been a partner there if he had stayed. So I got to continue to learn from an amazing lawyer, but also I got to join a very entrepreneurial company where there was a lot of opportunity to move from legal to the business side. And what I really didn't plan was that our legal department was set up in a really unique way where we sat at the parent company level providing legal services down to all of our operating businesses. So we were a Peak Six is a private holding company. And because of that, I got to basically experience fractional general counsel services before I even knew that term. And I saw how much value we could add to the operating businesses that neither could have afforded our full rate, nor did they need us full time. And that just always stuck with me. I moved into other roles at Peak Six, but that concept always stuck with me.
It's amazing how that works out. And I don't know if you get asked ever by, college students or law students or, well, how did you figure out where, how to end up where you are today? Like they always want to know, like, what's the playbook? How do you get to
No idea.
you take all the experiences that life gives you, right? And you just
Yeah.
try to remember them and synthesize them as you go along. Like that's the only thing you could do. Like how are you going to know at that time that you'd end up where you are today and that experience would be so valuable, except for in hindsight, you know?
Well, I think my mom gave me this advice. My mom had an amazing career. And so I always and she's someone who went to law school, practiced, moved in house, and then moved to the business side. So I kind of always tried to model my career after her. And my dad is an entrepreneur. So I kind of am now bringing together the
Mhm,
two of
mhm.
them. But she always just gave me advice about like when there's a fork in the road, like look at the opportunities and decide whether it's something that kind of makes you want to jump. And I think that I coupled that with I always made sure, and this is maybe the lawyer in me, but I always made sure that there was an opportunity to go back
Mhm.
had I decided that the jump that I had made wasn't the right move. And yeah, so it's about knowing what you don't want to do, not jumping at things, because they offer the most money or they're the flashiest or whatever. It's really about like crossing things off your list and staying true to that. And then I think when you see an opportunity, even if the timing isn't right, like wasn't necessarily the right time for me, I just jumped.
Yeah. Yeah, I've recently learned of this concept of is it a one-way door or a two-way door type
Yeah.
decision-making process? And so it sounds like you tried to keep those two-way doors when you could.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's good. And yeah, it is. It's definitely more challenging if you have to close a door behind you. And that's not necessarily
Yeah.
the same thing as burning a bridge, right? It's just sometimes
Right.
opportunities are foreclosed to you and you make a certain decision. That's opportunity cost. That's the real world, let alone the business world. So then what was the process like then from going in-house to starting your own practice?
So some curves, a windy road in there. I went in-house. I was at Peak Six for almost 7 years, but first as an in-house lawyer, and then actually moved into a role investing for the family office arm of the firm for a couple years. And then the last thing I did there was I operated one of the companies that Peak Six owned, which was a crypto technology company. So I like totally moved away from the practice of law for about 4 years. But I think going back to what we were talking about with law school, like you never really leave that way of thinking behind. And so I was always bringing that to bear in whatever role I was in. So I ran that crypto company for about 2 years in total. And that included that in 2023, we sold the company to a small publicly traded company. And I went and worked for the buyer for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I was kind of like, oh my God, how do I take everything that I've done over the last decade and figure out a way to bring it all together in whatever I want to do next? And really, the only thing I knew was that I wanted to bet on myself in the next thing. And so I didn't actually immediately jump into starting my own firm. I thought first that I was going to buy a small business, and that led me to look at small law firms because I got very interested in the business of law. I tried to buy a couple law firms, and as part of that, when I was looking at different small law firms and really better understanding the business model, I came up with this idea that I was going to start, if once I acquired one of the law firms, I was going to start a new line of business that offered fractional general counsel services. And what got me really excited about that was that from a business standpoint, law firms are excellent businesses. They have everything that I was looking for when I was looking at any general business. They have really strong margins, usually low customer concentration, strong industry tailwinds, highly fragmented industry, which is great if you want to do acquisitions, and a lot of reoccurring revenue. But ideally, if you're going to buy a business, you're looking for something that has recurring revenue. And so I was like, how could I take one of these excellent businesses and add on a business line that maybe has more recurring revenue rather than just reoccurring revenue? And so I came up with this fractional general counsel offering. I was trying to pitch the law firm owners on this idea of what I was going to add to their business. And when I didn't win after the second LOI I put in, my husband said to me, like, you actually have a really great idea here. I think it's its own business. Have you ever considered just hanging out your shingle and doing that? And I hadn't because I was so focused on buying something. But that got me to put together a one pager, send it to a few friends, and I got my first two clients about 2 weeks later.
And you're like, oh, I gotta incorporate my single member LLC and stand this company up.
I had actually, because I was trying to buy something, I had already formed the entity.
Okay.
The only thing I had to do was file with the state, which I had done in that 2 week period. So, and I got malpractice insurance. So I was ready to go. And yeah, so it was mostly just like trying to figure out the pre-work, trying to figure out how to price and how to price the offering, who my ideal client was. And then as I went out there and started talking to people, being focused, because I think, you know, I'm sure you've encountered this, but like, once you tell people that you're a lawyer and they like you and they want to work with you, the clients kind of gear you toward the billable hour and you have to stop them.
Some clients, institutional clients, maybe clients who have paid lawyers by the hour before, but like for new clients who have like the blue ocean market opportunity for law firms, they're like, how like what do I pay you? How do I pay? Oh, subscription. Oh yeah, that makes sense because that's just like everything else that I pay.
I think I'm only focused on B2B client, B2B. I'm only focused on companies and companies that offer B2B services.
Mm-hmm.
So I did have to kind of convince people that this was a different and better model that they should try. But yeah, I agree that like to just, a normal consumer, they definitely understand the concept of a subscription.
Yeah, and my market, I'm like small business, right? Like those are my business clients because I have some retail clients, but like I'm most of my revenues even from B2B for my own firm, but they are like wholly owned by like one person usually, right? And like that person, what do they do for to run their business? They're subscribed to a million things, right? And so I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, you mean it's only X amount a month? And like, it's like, oh, it's on my website what the prices are, just like everything else they pay for, you know? Like,
Yeah.
okay, like, yes, this is no brainer. And they don't hire lawyers until they're being sued or they're being threatened by an employee, right? Like that's been their
Yeah.
experience with lawyers. And yes, they've paid billable hours, that's true, but they didn't even know they could hire a lawyer for like legal operations and legal stuff for just operating their business. They just didn't know there was even an opportunity. So again, different ICPs, and we found out we're both in the Chicago area. So some lawyers might think, who have closed mindset, think like, oh, we should be competitive with each other, but we just figured out we're not even serving the same clients.
Well, beyond that, like I laugh all the time, and I actually just listened to you at a conference talking about this. Like, it's a $400 billion market, and I think you even said like it's probably bigger than that because there's a certain amount of this like latent legal landscape where they're not getting service. Like, this is such a huge market, even for other fractional general counsels that are trying to service the exact same type of client that I am. Like, my business works with so few clients that I don't even view those people as competitive because there's enough work out there for everybody, and we're all just trying to offer a different way for people to buy legal services. And I think the more that we get the word out, the better for all of us.
But you said some things though that I also don't want to just gloss over. So in 2025, this year that we're recording, although this will realistically be released in 2026, I ran the series How to Run a Law Firm in 2025. And we tried to tackle starting a law firm as business owners. And you just came at this. You were like, I have to like, how do you price? How do you segment your ICP? Like, you're thinking like an entrepreneur. You're not thinking like a lawyer when you're doing that. So like, you gave a little bit of your background that made you come to that. But how important was that for you when getting started, that you actually were not just thinking, how am I going to deliver legal services, which is probably what most lawyers think.
I was one of those people for a while who had said like, "Oh, I'm a recovering lawyer." So like I didn't think of myself as a lawyer. I don't call Saturday Legal a law firm. It is technically a law firm. We are registered as a law firm with the state. We have malpractice insurance, but I don't talk about it that way because I don't think of what we're doing as a traditional law firm's as anywhere near what a traditional law firm delivers to a client. So I very much came at this from a perspective of a business that I would like to run, and also an offering that I think deserves a place in the market. And that starts with understanding from a client's perspective what is missing for them. And so my experience running a company gave me the opportunity to work with lots of different lawyers from lots of different law firms and excellent lawyers from excellent law firms. And also, we had our own internal lawyers, and I got to see the difference firsthand. Like, I got to experience, I also was an in-house lawyer, so I got to experience it myself firsthand. But then also, as the CEO of the company, I got to get advice from lots of different lawyers. And when when a lawyer is billing by the hour, it just creates this friction that I really had a hard time with, both because, you're as the client, you're cutting out important information because the meter's running and you want to make sure that you're not going to get billed an inordinate amount of money for a problem it's not deserving of the bill. But then also, like, the lawyer just lacks context on the general business operations because you haven't brought them into meetings that maybe aren't necessarily, there's no legal question. It's just, it would be nice to have a person who's really smart and comes at things from a really analytical mindset, listening to the conversation and helping to advise the company from a strategic standpoint. So I I definitely didn't start it like, oh my God, I have, this legal service that I like, I'm really good at, and therefore I'm going to offer it for money. Instead, I was like, what is missing out there? When did I experience that both as an in-house lawyer and as the CEO of the company? And how could I make it so that more companies and founders could experience that? And that's how I arrived at this offering.
So thinking about your experience running that subsidiary and then also as in-house counsel, I have to imagine, although correct me if I'm wrong, that you were also managing outside counsel billable hours. Did you have to do any of that?
Yes.
And so you've both experienced it, just so we're crystal clear for the audience, as a lawyer billing time and as someone who had to pay by the hour as well outside counsel.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think maybe like the biggest thing for me was this realization that when I was running Apex Crypto, I did a few things that took not a lot of time at all and made all the difference in the world for the business. It completely changed the value of the business. And it just like kind of blew my mind, like, oh my God, that like what a weird way to measure value to only think about value in terms of what you've done over the course of an hour versus the impact that you've made. And sometimes and so yes, I have managed I have managed my own time. I have managed the outside counsel spend, and I just to me it's absolutely arbitrary to pay by the hour, and I'm much more interested in having people in general, not just lawyers, but any service provider in general, be focused more on the impact of what they're delivering and the partnership that we're able to develop rather than how long it takes to deliver a document.
Right. And especially something that you've cued in on is when you're paying a lawyer by the hour, you expect them to do the highest value legal work for that time. And let's be real. I know partners at law firms that they bill for grammatically fixing associate work,
Yeah.
right? And look, like, will it have substantive impact if like a judge is going to read this thing, or if the other side is going to read this, that it's grammatically and syntactically correct? Yeah, it will, but that's not what somebody wants to pay for. And if your lawyer is giving you good technology or business advice, you don't want to pay them $1,000 an hour for that, right? Like that's not the reason you hired them. You put them in a box. But what you just talked about is there's way more value that we could give as fractional GCs. That's not just the legal stuff, but we know law touches everything, right? But you've worked in you've run businesses. Like I've had entrepreneurial streaks. We are advising at the intersection of law and business and tech and whatever else the company is in the business of, right? And so we're able to bring our whole selves and all of our experience for a fixed or subscription fee that the other billable hour lawyers just, even if they could provide it, no client would pay for that, don't you think?
Yes. So, yes, I haven't yet come up with a term for this actually, but I read this really interesting article last year about how there's this new field of maybe we shouldn't call it therapy, but it's adjacent to therapy, coaching, and actually a lot of trained therapists are choosing to become coaches because it's very liberating to not only talk about the past, but also help their clients with the future. They're sometimes giving advice that might not fall strictly within the lines of therapy. And I actually think there's an interesting corollary with fractional general counsel work and lawyering. I think that there's business advice that a senior person can give where they're using their legal training and legal mind, but it's not necessarily what I would call legal advice. So, and I think it's much more like growth mindset oriented rather than fixed mindset oriented. And all of that, I believe, is supported by a model that is, something other than the billable hour. So for me, it's flat monthly fees. I know some other people use project-based billing, but for me, I'm, trying to model what it would be like if you had someone that was in-house and really had that full context on the business.
Yeah, and the whole jargon of what to call it, right? I once talked to some lawyer about having them on my show, and this was like in the early years. This was like 3 years ago. And she was like, "Oh, well, I don't do subscription. Your podcast called Law Subscribed. I just bill them the same rate every month." Like that's like that's subscription. Like you might not think about it as subscription, but however you want to call it, like a flat monthly fee. I mean, for what it's worth, like under our rules of professional conduct in Illinois, I contextualize specifically that my fee is a
Right.
flat monthly fee, like under our rules. But I'm still considering it like a membership, a subscription,
Yes.
a services plan, right? Like I in the marketing material and in the way that I talk about it. Like I choose to use subscription. I know there's subscription fatigue, and so there might be some reasons not to use that word. So like, is there any reason why you call it a flat monthly fee rather than
Yes,
a
at the
subscription, something like
rate
that?
that I am charging, I think that one of the big hurdles that I experience with prospects is that it's a it's a big line item. And so everyone wants to know before they sign up, like, okay, if it's not a fit for us, are we able to get out? And so I don't require any type of long-term commitment. The way that the engagement letter works is that all of our clients can choose to cancel if they can give us 30 days notice, and we'll make sure that the transition happens smoothly. But I definitely don't want to make anyone feel like they are subscribed for a certain period of time and that they can't get out of the arrangement. I have found that it is an incredibly sticky relationship because we're adding so much value, and like that's what I want. I
Hmm.
want the clients to continue to we haven't had churn, and that's because we're adding value and we continue to add value every single month. But I want them to know that they have the ability to get out if they want to. And that being said, I do try to make sure as I'm just doing my diligence up front that there's at least that we're aligned in terms of the fact that there's kind of enough runway that it makes sense for us to invest up front in the relationship, because every time you bring on a new client, there's just a little bit of upfront foundation you have to lay to get to really know the client. And so we are investing in the beginning in that relationship and spending a little bit more time to know the business and know the people.
Yeah, yeah. And, I think that having some kind of like they subscribe, maybe there's an initial onboarding fee on top of that. I think I've seen some law firms prefer that kind of thing. It really like it depends on the way the law firm practices law, the type of industry it's serving, the nature of is it litigation or transactional? Because there's a lot of work to do
Right.
when you get on a new case for litigation, right? And I have seen some law firms also just do no, we're just going to charge a fixed rate every month, and there will be some months that we don't do very much because we're just waiting on the other side, and that's when they make up the difference, right? And like rather than charging a higher upfront fee because they find it's easier to convert clients. Now it's also harder
Right.
to get out of it in litigation. You got to ask the court, right? And all this stuff. So I know they envy us fractional GCs, or it could be like, okay, you're terminating, okay, like month to month. All my subscriptions are month to month, and I just interviewed an attorney who does just federal firearms licensing, and he
Wow.
does annual subscriptions actually, and so his that's his subscription. Now some pay annually for discount, some pay monthly, so the true SaaS, model for him. And I think that's far less common is the annual subscriptions in the legal space for the reason that if a
Well,
client wants to get out, like we can't like force them to be engaged. And he admitted that. He admitted
so
that.
I
But
don't know
like
if you
it's
saw
one of those
last
weird
week,
things.
there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about how the billable hour is dead. Guessing no? No? Yeah.
No,
Okay,
you'd think I would, but
I'll
I'll
send it to
find it
you.
now. Thank you for that tip. But yeah,
So
please
so the Wall Street
continue though.
Journal, it was
Explain.
mostly in the context of AI. And by the way, like I just got super lucky with all of that timing working out in my favor. Like that was not why I started this. It was the best luck ever, but I have learned that a lot of fortune in business is it comes down to timing and luck. But so the article was about how the billable hour is, the most prevalent way that legal services are billed, but that wasn't always the way. And they actually cite the person who developed a billable hour model. I don't remember what the year was, but like the early 1900s. And so I put the article into ChatGPT and I said, this is so interesting. I have this fractional general counsel practice where I do flat monthly fees. I'm really curious, given that, can you take a look at this article and let me know like what the different billable models were before the billable hour in the legal services industry? And what I found was the main one was actually annual retainers.
A
No, no, no.
classic
Yes.
retainer, right? Not
Yeah,
a modern retainer, which is
exactly.
we bill against it by how
Yeah.
much time we spend. Yeah, but the classic pay you an amount of money, and when I need you,
Yes. And so
the lawyer will do
it
whatever I need them to
actually
do.
it's so interesting that we're so oriented toward the hour as a measure of time, because even what I'm doing, like a monthly fee, was even more kind of customized to the needs of the client than what previously was in vogue, which was you just paid a flat fee for the entire year. And that was preset and you had access to this lawyer for whenever you needed them and they were there. But I don't think from what I've seen that that meant that each lawyer was fully retained by that client. I actually think that they were the original fractional GCs.
I just said this to the other guy who I had on earlier today on LinkedIn Live. And I said, whenever I see somebody
Okay.
using ChatGPT, it's like when I see an at AOL or Yahoo email. There's a lot
Okay.
better tools now. There's way better tools. ChatGPT is great, and it does a really good job at being the ultimate generalist. I like, and especially lawyers, I like purpose-built tools. I like tools that are designed for a specific purpose. So, like, do I want the ultimate generalist doing online research?
Yeah.
Or do I want the ultimate online researcher doing online research? Right? And so Perplexity is that. That's what it's built for. It's built purpose first. They have their own large language model and they integrate with they're multi-model. So they use ChatGPT, they use Gemini, they use Grok, they use Claude when and it uses its own LLM to determine which one of those tools will be best to do the task all day, every day. And
Mhm.
I use OpenAI's models in other tools that integrate with it. So like it's a phenomenal technology. But anyway, so I asked Perplexity about the Wall Street Journal article and it found it and it's interesting. And the article is called Say Goodbye to the Billable Hour Thanks to AI. Oh, amazing title. I love it. I love it. I love it. Then I asked it, does it suggest subscriptions can replace it being the billable hour? And it says, and you read
It
the
doesn't.
article, but it says it doesn't actually talk
Right.
about
And
subscriptions. It
so
talks
and
about
I, that's
outcome-based and
that's really what
value-based.
got me thinking. It was like I I don't really know what that means in terms of my client, the work that I do. I think that it outcome based, value based, like it works when, I mean, a lot of litigators actually do that with contingency models. I think litigators are actually, in a lot of ways, more creative with their billing than we are on the transactional side. But I can see how on the transactional side that would work with a deal. But for like the day-to-day legal work, which is really what I'm offering to my clients, I don't really know, what that means. I think that the best example, yeah, just to have a flat monthly fee and you kind of certain months there's a ton of value that's added because really it's more about like the strategic advice that you didn't know that you needed when you needed it. And then the the legal work that gets done, the routine legal work that gets done, that's I think of that as like, okay, you would have had to pay any lawyer a certain amount to get that legal work done, and you kind of get the bonus of having the strategic advice, when needed.
Let me tell you about the brand new sponsor for Law Subscribed, Paxton. I've been using Paxton as my legal AI tool for over 2 years. I continue to evaluate and demo other legal AI tools in the market and still decide to stick with Paxton because of its reliability, its accuracy, its ease of use, affordability, and they do not lock you into a long-term contract. Now, as a transactional and fractional general counsel attorney, I'm using Paxton for all of my substantive and non-substantive legal work, whether that's legal research, analysis, drafting, or enhancing existing legal work product. In the time it used to take me to draft and analyze legal documents, now, after a little bit of back and forth with Paxton, I have something ready to go in minutes that used to take hours or even days. While I'm no longer a litigator, I could see how valuable Paxton would be when researching a new issue, preparing for a deposition, drafting a motion, or going to trial. So if your firm would benefit from using Paxton as your legal AI tool, then make sure to use the link in the description when signing up to let Paxton know I sent you. That's all about our new sponsor. Now back to the show. Yes, and it's especially for my clients is somebody at the company, usually in my instance the business owner themselves, would have had to do it themselves instead of doing work that they're actually good at or that they actually enjoy. So the immediate outcome based value is you don't have to do the legal stuff. Let me do the legal stuff for that known price, for the pricing transparency, right? I know what it costs to pay a salaried employee to do the work that they need to do. Well, we're not a full-time salaried employee, but we are a full team member to the extent that you have illegal stuff in your business, right? So
Mhm.
we're kind of like a part-time employee, but we're like a full team member for your legal stuff. And the outcome, the value is no one else on the team who's not a lawyer
Yep.
and hates reading contracts has to do that. That's the outcome. It's just immediate.
Right.
It's not like let's see what
Yeah.
happens in 2 years in litigation. Yeah. Yeah, and it's hard, right? Because so much of our outcome-based stuff in the transactional
Right.
side is the bad thing didn't happen. How do we prove that? Like, how do we show it? Like, it's hard, right? The bad thing didn't happen. Or we got to deal time faster because I'm not just trying to bill a bunch of hours on this. So, like, think about the money that you made off this MSA being signed. If we didn't sign that we signed it in 60 days. In a normal deal time, that might have been 6 months. So that 4 months of revenue that you made sooner rather than later, that's the value.
I think that's 100% how I'm thinking about it. The speed to execution, bringing revenue online faster, that is for sure what resonates the most with my clients. And that's because I experienced that. Like the last thing a client wants to hear is that they're not able to bring on a new customer because something's held up in legal. And so we try to just completely get rid of that concern by being, you know, retained and available. We're, always accessible. We turn things around really quickly in order to supercharge the business.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm also really glad you brought up this article too, and that it doesn't say anything about subscription, Rachel, because what that tells me is even though I've been doing this just a little longer than you, like not that much since 2022, have I actually been practicing it, right? We are the vanguard still, even though you just started like within a year or so ago, like you are at the cutting edge. They're not even writing about it yet in the Wall Street Journal. And yet I have seen Mark Cuban being quoted recently about how law firms need to do other alternative fees. And he does say subscription. But I mean, that's also Mark Cuban, and he's also his own animal in the entrepreneur billionaire space, right? Like he's thinking ahead like other people are not, right? So I think that we are still so early and we have a lot of ability to, this is why I have the podcast, increase awareness that this is even an option. Law firms, experts, they don't know that subscription is a viable business model, whether you call it flat monthly fee or whatever, right? To replace the billable hour, they just think, oh, fixed fee rates or contingency or, success fee, right? Success fees. So
I I I'm curious what you think about whether subscription is a viable alternative for all lawyers. Because one thing that I think about is that, as someone who practiced in a corporate group and then was in-house serving in a corporate capacity, I have a pretty broad skill set. I kind of can handle anything that falls under the corporate umbrella. And I think that, I then know when to escalate something if it's a specialist matter. I'm curious if you think that the subscription model works well for someone who's chosen to be a specialist, whether it's IP or tax or, how do you think about it for more of a specialist attorney?
I think it works even better, actually.
Really?
I think it works way better. I think it works like the attorney I was just talking to earlier today. He does just like his firm is called the FFL Guard,
Uh-huh.
the Federal Firearm License Guard, right? And all he does is help firearm manufacturers and sellers. There's provider legal, just helping as fractional GC for small medical and dental practices. There's the Web3 law lawyer who Joanne Holmes, right? Like the more niche you get, actually the easier it is because also then your ability to productize your service to deliver those transformations to end clients is easier to do. Like when you're general, it's easier
Mm,
conceptually to say, well, I could help you generally with like a lot of things, but it's actually harder for us to create efficiencies and productize and all that. Now with AI, it makes it a heck of a lot easier. But and any practice area, litigation, anything, and even if like you still want to do contingency on the PI side, if you wanted to charge $100 a month just for like faster access, schedule calls with us instead of just trying to get us on the phone, right? Like even things that like just help your efficiency. And instead of taking 33%, we take 29%, right? But like maybe you have to pay for some upfront costs because then when we get a really good settlement offer, there's more skin, you've got more skin in the game because you're actually paying even if it's just $100 a month. Now, look, some people can't afford to pay anything. That's not for them. But, I think whatever it is, I can find a way to use subscription that benefits the firm and, as you know so well, aligns incentives with the client, not taking advantage of the client. And what fixed fee does is it creates a win or lose situation. What the subscription model does is it helps eliminate that win-lose situation. This task took longer than it should have, or it didn't take as long as it could have. And it turns it on its
Yes, I
head
totally
into
agree with
let's
that.
create a
And okay,
relationship.
that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about that. But like, I do think one of the hard parts about a subscription for someone who is a generalist is that you do have to be really careful about scope creep, and you need to, as a lawyer, I think we're all trained not to dabble and go outside of our areas of knowledge. And so I'm always thinking about that. But I think as a former M&A lawyer, it is something that I experience where I love a deal, I'm a deal junkie, and I have to tell my clients like, nope, that's outside the scope of the arrangement. So that's one of the hard parts about it. But I think there's like we were talking about before, there's just so much legal work to do. That's okay. There are certain things that I don't think fit into the model that I'm doing, and that's that's okay. There's plenty of other legal work that does.
And if it doesn't fit into the model, I would just say you need to better tier your subscriptions, right? Because if somebody has things that go outside the scope, well, that scope might be, okay, you were paying me X amount a month, now you're paying me X times two, right? And you have in your engagement terms that, if we have to reevaluate the scope or mid-month, you go outside the scope, you have the option to, you decide, go up to a higher subscription level that will then cover that scope, right? And so for me, the way I handle this in my engagement terms, by the way, subscriptionattorney.com/#engagement, it's available there for clients. It's available there for lawyers who want to check it out. Illinois only, but this is what I use in Illinois, is I just have legal projects defined, right? And it's very broad. A legal project could be a singular non-disclosure agreement. It could also be a singular master services agreement. Big difference, but they're not cumulative. And again, I define it, I think, really well in my engagement terms, where if we're negotiating this deal and it's taking us 3 months and you get 3 projects a month, as long as this deal that we're redlining and negotiating is ongoing, you only have 2 remaining projects every month, right? And so the moment you need more from me and you get to decide, then we'll bump you up to the next subscription level, right? And the target market that I'm serving, 7 projects is my maximum publicly available subscription, is more than enough than any of my clients will be handling a month. And if it's not, I need to have I could do custom pricing if I had to, right? And I've done that in the past, but I really like that's the number that I really like. So I find that when lawyers tell me, oh, we're going to have to switch to hourly, even though they hate at billable hours and their client hates billable hours because, hey, we didn't anticipate this and whatever. It's like, no, 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 no. Whatever you're charging a month, multiply it by 1.5 or 2, right? And like that's what you have to start charging your client as. And they're not always open-minded as me and you, Rachel, on the monthly thing. Some lawyers want to, they if they're in the process of switching, they want to maybe charge by the hour. They're not really sure, and I'm like, no, just charge, or they want to lock them in longer than month to month. I'm like, no, this is why month to month is really valuable, is because now you can say mid-month, okay, we had to bump you up to the next subscription tier because you thought you were
Right.
a silver client. You're a platinum client. We're going right over
I do
gold.
have a situation where I've done that in the past. Still a little tough, but I think that in general, I think that's an edge case. I think that most of the time it does work so well. And I think one thing that we haven't really talked a lot about that I actually am the most excited about is this is the most fun I've had practicing law ever. And I don't think it would be possible if I weren't executing this business model. So I think actually like the really, really cool opportunity is I talked to so many people. They saw what I did, they saw my path, and they're like, I want to go do that. I want to start my own fractional practice. And I always pay it forward. I always talk to people. Everyone paid it forward with me. So I always talk to everybody. And they talk about how they hate the billable hour, and then I talk to them like a couple months later, and it's really, really hard to get those first few clients on a flat monthly fee if you're charging a high flat monthly fee. And so inevitably they've taken on hourly work, and that then starts to snowball. And then now you have a small law firm, and as a solo practitioner, I see a lot of them run into a problem where it's feast or famine. They have a month that is a really, really strong month, and then you aren't building up the pipeline the way that you should, and as a result, the next month you're like, wait, is any work going to come in? And just kind of that cycle continues on. I don't have that. Like I know every single month exactly what I'm going to make. I know exactly what work is going to be, I might not know the specifics of whether it's going to be an MSA or we're going to need to do an MOU for this new relationship. We're not even sure what it is, or there's a new employee coming in and we need to figure out this custom type of offer letter. Like there could be a lot of different forms of what the actual day to day work is, but I know generally where it's coming from and who I'm going to be working with, and that there will be a certain amount of work that's coming in every month, which has allowed me to hire 2 employees. Like it just, to me, it's a much healthier business, and also it makes it so that it's much more fun to practice because it alleviates a lot of the anxiety. So anyway, I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think there's so many benefits for the client, but I also think there are so many benefits for the lawyers if they're willing to unlearn the billable hour, but it's not easy.
It's not easy, and it's always easier to burn the boats, in my opinion, right? Like,
Yeah.
and the bigger the firm, the harder it is to change the mindset, right, of a bunch of lawyers. Yeah, everything you said is so great, and it's one of these things where
Yeah.
to actually be able to say, I like practicing law,
Yeah. I know.
I just
I
don't
know.
hear
And
that from a lot of
I always
lawyers. You
really,
just
I've
don't.
always loved lawyers. I love the way we all think. But I think that this to me, yes, this is my own firm, but even for the people who are working at Saturday Legal, I hear from them like this is so much more entrepreneurial, and it's because we're able to be this like direct extension of our clients' teams where we're helping them with things that are legal but also quasi legal, and we're just brought in on conversations that we otherwise wouldn't have been brought in on, and that makes all of, and also that we're reinventing the firm's business, our firm's business model. All of it feels much more entrepreneurial and makes it so that it's fun to practice.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So technology. Sometimes when lawyers say they want to do what we do, they like to ask the technology question. And I ask a lot of my guests about it. I have CLEs dedicated exclusively to technology for the solo practice virtual law firm, right?
Um,
Lawyers.
okay, well, I'm not using anything that's really purpose built for legal, so I don't know that you're going to love my answer. And you already told me that I'm using like a Yahoo or
Mhm.
Hotmail email with my chat GPT. But
No, 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 I did. I'm, if you told somebody in 2001 that why are you using AOL, email, use Gmail, that was like, that's where we are, right? Like people haven't realized yet that AOL is out and Gmail is in. So you're still cutting edge, Rachel, okay?
just I think whether you're using ChatGPT or Perplexity or
Yeah.
Claude or whatever you're using, or a purpose built legal AI tool, I think the way that I'm using it, at least at this point, is so much more about the prompting that I'm doing. And sometimes that means like, kind of messy prompting to begin with. And then I'll take an entire conversation. And once I've gotten to the answer that I wanted to get to, and then ask the AI to create a custom prompt for me that I could have asked at the beginning. And then, so I'm using the AI to help me become a better prompter. But I
Mm-hmm.
think like, it the tool is definitely important, but it's much, much, much more about the like kind of the human use of the tool in my mind at this point than it is about the tool itself.
And what you just described, okay, is really next level use of AI, because some lawyers, especially lawyers, get like overthinking about like, what should I prompt? What should I say? How do I do this? But like using the AI
Yes, they
to
should
help
QA
you
each
with
other.
how to get the best output from the AI. In fact, I try to use different tools for that, right? Like I'll be in Perplexity, like I'll be in, I just had to do this crazy thing where I had to use Paxton, which is my legal AI, and Perplexity and Notebook LM, right? And so like I'm using like 3 different tools, and I'm like, okay, and I had to tell it, okay, I'm going to do this thing in Notebook, and I'm going to do this thing in Paxton.
Mhm.
And like, first I want need you to tell me everything you know about Paxton so you could help me create a Word doc, because Paxton can't export in Excel, but Perplexity can. But I can't give Perplexity like private client information, but Paxton's HIPAA certified and SOC 2 compliant, right? So I can like, yeah. Anyway, the point is, it is, whether you're using ChatGPT or whatever, what you're talking about, lawyers
Yes,
don't realize. Most users of AI don't realize they can help them with prompting. So next level stuff. Just wanted to qualify that.
I'm using Zoom. I'm using QuickBooks to handle. I'm because I'm doing my subscription a little bit differently and just sending out an invoice every month. It's very simple just to do my monthly invoicing using QuickBooks. I am using ChatGPT. We use Asana as a team to stay organized. We use Gmail. Yeah, sometimes we use Otter AI to transcribe call notes, and I think that's about it.
So when you say Gmail, you mean Google Workspace, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So you're already, if you're paying at least $14 a seat for Google Business Standard, you're paying for Google's version of ChatGPT, Gemini, and you have
I
access to Notebook
someone on my
LM
team
Pro,
that
which
uses
is
it
arguably the
extensively.
best
So
GPT
yes, I've
wrapper in
seen it.
existence right now. And so yeah. So I'm just saying, like, if you wanted to shrink your tech
Mhm.
stack a little bit, it's good to have multiple AI tools. But Gemini does everything and more, in my opinion, from what ChatGPT does. And you're getting access to that as a paid Google Workspace subscriber already. So something to think about. And for me anyway, I get better output from Gemini than I do
I
from
think no, I think
ChatGPT,
you're
but that
right.
just might be the way that I communicate and that Gemini understands the way I communicate, right? It's just worth playing around. You're already paying for it, so you might as well play around with it, right? Because most people don't realize necessarily that they have all these awesome tools inside of Google Workspace. And like, like inside my email, inside Google Docs, like what I will do, Rachel, is I'm still in Microsoft Word a little because you have to be in our line of work. But I upload it into the Google Drive folder for my client. I convert it inside of Google to a Google Doc. And then right inside of Google Doc, I have Gemini
Mhm.
baked into there. And I'll just ask a question like, does anything in this contract not make any sense? And even just that little question with Gemini baked into Google Docs. Now, if you were to ask that inside of Notebook, I actually think you'll get better answers. And I do that inside of Notebook as well. But sometimes it'll find
Right.
things like, oh, it's referencing section 3.3, but there is no section 3.3, right? Because it was removed in an earlier version of the contract. And it will find low hanging fruit like that. And it's just, it's just
Okay.
Gemini
I'll check
inside of
it out.
Google Docs is so good for low level, stuff like that. Highly recommend.
Well, that's the thing. I feel like the biggest missing link with ChatGPT is the fact that there's no Word plugin, and I it's so silly. And like having worked with a tech company, I realize how silly this is. But like the extra time and friction of going into of uploading something to ChatGPT, then like getting kind of like a narrative response on the changes that you should make and having to go back to Word, it just adds this unnecessary time spent and friction that I think, I see that there are purpose-built legal AI tools where you can just directly be in Word and make edits. That obviously makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, so two sponsors come to mind for
Yes,
that.
it
Now,
is.
I wouldn't partner with them if they weren't good, right? But like Gavel Exec, I think is a word plugin, and I've got a link in the show notes, right, to Gavel. And then Paxton, while it doesn't integrate directly into Word, it does export as Word docs. And so Paxton, at the same time I'm
Yep,
uploading the doc to Google Drive, in the time that it takes me to do that, I'm also uploading it to Paxton, right, to just analyze the Word doc, and then you could export, as
no,
Word
oh
docs
my
as well in
gosh.
that. So
Also, oh, I forgot a really important one. I also use Practical Law. That is something that I used when I was in house. I have a great library of precedent available to me, but I view having a Practical Law subscription, sorry, that I'm like, you're getting they're
yeah.
basically getting called out by name when they haven't sponsored the show. But I do think it's really important when you go out on your own to have something that you feel really confident is a library of vetted documents. And I view it almost as part of like my malpractice insurance. So just having AI without having base documents that have been reviewed by lawyers
Mhm.
to me is a little bit of a gap. Sometimes I use Practical Law, sometimes I have my own forms, but just knowing that I have something that has been vetted is such an important step for me. So anyway, that's one other tech tool.
No, that's great to hear. I think you might be the first lawyer who said they use practical law. I've used it a little bit in like past practices. It can be a really good tool, and you'd think with their AI stuff they might be
Yep.
able to figure that out. Although I know they haven't really
Yep.
been able to do that yet. But Lexis has their own thing, Law Insider, right? Like they're a
Mhm.
document
Yep.
database, sponsor of the show, but also I use them in my practice. 650, right? Does this for HR documents, and employment agreements and handbooks and stuff that lawyers review and update the automations and
Totally.
everything. So
And then the AI, like on top of that, yes, the AI seems very cheap relative to that.
especially a Thomson Westlaw subscription or Lexus subscription. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the last question I want to ask you is, and we kind of came up earlier in the conversation. I didn't call it out, but I think it's important to talk about it. And I know you haven't listened to like all the episodes of Law Subscribed, but if you go back and find the ones where I interview women attorneys, and I mean I ask this of everybody, but especially the women attorneys, is you
Mhm.
know big law, especially in the billable hour, was really built for the white male lawyer, right? Doesn't have a family, isn't expected to both now in the modern world work and take care of the household. Not that that's fair, and not that that's how it should be, but that's kind of what our society imposes on women and women attorneys, right? So I found that in having the show, most of the innovative lawyers out there that I've been able to talk
Mhm.
to are women attorneys. I mean, and attorneys of color, but like especially women attorneys, right? So you've made it work, right? What do you have to say to those other attorneys like you out there who might be listening one day about how they can? Well, first of all, the system's broken and it shouldn't be broken. Maybe big law should work for them. But like, why did you make the decision you did, and how
Um,
has that helped you in
so
in who you are as a whole person, not just as a lawyer?
yeah. No, it's okay. I grew up with 2 working parents, and so I didn't really think that there was any other way. And I also grew up with someone who was my nanny from the time I was a baby until she actually passed away a few years ago, who she was like a second mom to me. So, I've always known that it's okay to have a career as a woman and that your children will admire you for it, and that it's also okay to have a third person in their lives that will love them and that they will love, because that's what I experienced myself. So I always kind of knew I was going to make it work. I was going to find a way to make it work. And we have a nanny. She is absolutely amazing. And none of this would work without her. My husband is a founder and has been for the last like 13 years at this point. So we've been very, very lucky that our seasons have not overlapped. We've both had incredibly busy seasons, but they haven't overlapped. I think your question is interesting because I'm not sure that, people who work in big law don't have families. I just think that there's usually someone who is the primary person that's at home with the kids if there is a family. And that just, like I said, was never going to be my situation. So I do think that the business that I'm building is a perfect solution to it. I want I have a lot of ambition and I want a job that is fun and intellectually stimulating, where the work is sophisticated, the people I'm dealing with are doing big things, and I want to be a part of that. And I also really love when there's like when the work is dynamic and when there's a lot of diversity to the work. I get bored kind of doing the same thing over and over again. I think it's really, really hard to have all those things be true unless you're at a big law firm. But like I said, that doesn't really work that well for my life. So I am like an evangelist about this model. I love that I can operate at the level I'm operating at and also be the chaperone for my son's field trip on a Friday afternoon. Like that's literally the dream. I get to I get to work out. I still work a lot. I don't want to make it sound like I don't work a lot. I work really, really hard and I'm not only practicing every day, but also building a business. So I still am working really hard, but I'm doing it on my own terms. I have autonomy. I want to make sure that the people who work for me also feel that same level of autonomy. And so yeah, I think that the most important thing to me was always that I had a career where I still continued to, pour a lot of myself into it and move forward and up and build bigger and bigger things, but also that I can sign off at 6 p.m., have dinner with my kids, put them to bed, and then I can log back on once they're asleep. And I've been able to do that.
And it's fill your cup work, even though you work hard, right? Like, as you said, you're having
Yeah,
fun, and they're your clients, and it's your business, and you've built this from
totally.
nothing, you know? I mean, not entirely from nothing, upbringing and experience and all that, but like when you're a founder, right? Like it's your business, everything you build. And look, are we able to build equity in our law firms, like, companies that could raise money?
But it's total yeah, it's so different from building like a standard company. Yes, it very much, at least at this point, feels like this all kind of happens because of my blood, sweat, and tears. And so it's more like a book of business than it is necessarily equity in a company at this point. But it still is incredibly fulfilling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's yours. And it's not working 80 hours for some other law firm. Yeah. And if you did have to, like, I very rarely work an 80-hour week. I've done it since starting my own business. But yeah. I mean, well,
Okay.
I'm so happy to hear that, Rachel. And, stick around for just a couple of minutes after we say goodbye here. But if folks wanted to learn more about you, connect with you, learn about your law firm, what's all the links?
Rachel Saunders on LinkedIn. My website is saturday-legal.com. I actually also own saturdaylegal.com. I got to make that switch over at some point. They both direct to the same place, but I think all business owners will appreciate that kind of just initial mess that you have to figure out. And my email is rachel@saturday-legal.com.
Well, thanks again so much for coming on Law Subscribed.
Thank you for having me. This is fun.
And that's a wrap. Thanks for tuning in. Make someone's day by sharing this episode with them. Remember to sign up for your free account at practi.ai to trade billing time for recurring revenue. Until next time, this is Matthew Kurbis with Law Subscribed.